Emmylou Harris has been active for 54 years in the industry, and she is one of the most revered and admired stars in America. But looking back, most people find it hard to believe the amount of suffering she had to go through before getting to the point she is now in her life and career. But the main question is, with showbiz being a cutthroat scene where finding a celebrity with their legacy intact can be like finding a unicorn, how did Emmylou struggle to the top of her industry without getting involved in any serious controversy? Let's find out while showing you some of her rare photos. On April 2nd, 1947, Emmylou Harris was born to Walter Rutland Harris and Eugenia Harris in Birmingham, Alabama. Walter was a Marine Corps officer who served in both World War II and the Korean War. During the Korean War, he was captured by the enemy and became a prisoner of war. Even after he was released, he refused to open up about his experiences, forming an emotional barrier between him and Emmylou. Aside from her father's troubles, Emmylou had a typical childhood, or an atypical one if you ask her classmates. She was such an excellent student at school that most of her friends considered her weird. According to them, she took her studies too seriously. Not a bad problem for a student to have, wouldn't you say? Well, Emmylou's seriousness at school really paid off. Attending high school in Woodbridge, Virginia, she was a straight A student. She wasn't just a nerd who stayed indoors studying all day. As it turns out, she won the Miss Woodbridge beauty pageant in her teen years. On top of all this, she was a saxophonist in her school marching band. To put it succinctly, she was having her cake and eating it too. At that point in her life, it was Emmylou's dream to become an actress. She had minimal interest in music. On the other hand, her older brother was obsessed with folk music. It was through his engagement with the genre that Emmylou started to fall for it herself. Be that as it may, it took years for her to finally begin her journey in the music industry. In 1965, at the age of 18, Emmylou Harris graduated from Garfield Senior High School as the class valedictorian. Due to her efforts in school, she received a scholarship from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro to study drama. Just like she conquered high school, she was all set to take over college. Well, for Emmylou, things in college didn't go as planned. The razor-sharp focus she had had in high school was all of a sudden absent. Sure, she had some highlights, such as appearing in the college productions of The Tempest and The Dancing Donkey, but on the whole, one could say that she was distracted. Incidentally, it was around this time in her life that her interest in folk music began to pick up. As a matter of fact, she formed a folk duo known as the Emerald City. The duo performed in local spaces, including coffee houses. Emmylou also got comfortable appearing as a solo artist. She performed regularly at a coffee house known as The Corner. Slowly, her interest in acting was fading, and her interest in music was surging. Losing focus in college, Emmylou decided to drop out. Being only 20 years old at the time, this move was a shock to her close friends and family. Unsure what she wanted to do, she ended up enrolling in a different college, Boston University. However, unfocused and unsatisfied once again, she dropped out. At this time in her life, Emmylou moved to Virginia Beach. There, she supported herself by singing and waitressing. After a couple of months of doing that, she moved back to New York to join the Greenwich Village community. There was a thriving folk music scene there, and Emmylou simply felt like she had to be a part of that. At the tail end of the 60s, Emmylou got married to her first husband and gave birth to her daughter. While living in Greenwich with her family, she met so many folk musicians and formed friendships with them. This included such names as Paul Siebel, Jerry Jeff Walker, and Dave Bromberg. They would form a support system that she would lean on from time to time throughout her life. In Greenwich, Emmylou and her family were not really financially stable. To support them, she continued to sing and wait tables on top of working at a bookstore. Lucky for her, she met her first manager and signed a record deal with Jubilee Records. Her first album, Gilding Bird, was then released in 1970. For Emmylou, it looked like her big break had finally appeared. However, what seemed like a big opportunity soon turned to dust in her mouth. Unfortunately for Emmylou, Jubilee Records went bankrupt shortly after her album dropped. This meant that she was once again unmoored and would have to go back to a life of singing in clubs and waiting on tables. Just because she missed one opportunity didn't mean she wouldn't get another one, right? Well, as it turned out, her husband didn't see things that way. Taking the family to Nashville, Emmylou's husband sought to break into the music industry and become a star himself. However, It was evident to Emmylou that he just didn't have the chops for that business. As a result, just a year after they got married, they were divorced. He left Emmylou to fend for their daughter by herself. This was one of the most challenging periods of Emmylou's life. She tried singing and waiting tables, but it just wasn't working out. Surviving on Medicaid and food stamps, she decided that she just couldn't live that way anymore. Wanting more for her daughter, she moved back to her parents' house in Washington, D.C. In Washington, Emmylou continued to sing publicly from time to time. However, she had fully given up on breaking into the industry and becoming a major star. Incidentally, her big break was right around the corner, and it came in the form of singer-songwriter Graham Parsons. Parsons was once a member of the superstar rock bands The Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers. However, he was trying to establish a career as a solo artist. He had heard of Emmylou, who was building up quite the following in Washington. Looking for a harmony singer, a friend brought up Emmylou Harris. However, Parsons was not too convinced about her. Incidentally, during this conversation, Parsons and his friend were overheard by Emmylou's babysitter, who just happened to be in the same location. The babysitter convinced them that Emmylou was right for the job and gave them her contact. Parsons then convinced Emmylou to visit the studio and sing for him. Hearing her voice for the first time, a beautiful musical partnership was born. Despite the fact that Parsons' first solo album, GP, featuring Emmylou's vocals, was not commercially successful, the two of them worked so well that they decided to record and tour together even more. Parsons was a music genius who had fused country rock with classical country music. It was through her collaborations with him that Emmylou figured out the element that was missing in her own music. In her own words, "Once I started singing country music with Graham, there was no turning back for me." Her passion for music reinstated, Emmylou once again felt ready to tackle the industry. In 1973, when she was 26 years old, Emmylou returned to Parsons' studio to work on his new album, Grievous Angel. Mere weeks after the recording sessions were finished, tragedy struck. After getting drunk and overdosing on morphine, Parsons died. His death was a huge shock to Emmylou and almost destabilized her. Throughout his career as a musician, Parsons had been a heavy drug user. He experimented a lot with psychedelics, believing them to be the source of his musical inspiration. According to his autopsy, he overdosed on enough morphine to kill 3 people. Though the urge to buckle under the devastation of his death was strong, Emmylou chose instead to continue the work they had begun to preserve his legacy. Carrying on the torch of country rock, Emmylou finally found the superstar success she had been chasing ever since she dropped out of college. She signed a major deal with Warner Brothers Records, which took her career to a whole new level. Collaborating with Canada-based producer Brian Ahern, Emmylou recorded several albums. They proceeded to be chart-topping and award-winning hits. She would later marry him in 1977. Although Emmylou's career has gone on for 5 more decades, the hardest parts were finally behind her. After struggling through confusion, frustration, divorce, poverty, and tragedy, she was finally a superstar. She has since sold 15 million records worldwide and won 13 Grammy Awards. Now, she is undoubtedly one of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time. Emmylou is currently 76 years old. It has been 8 years since her last album. Most of her fans are not expecting a new one. But with how resilient she is, we wouldn't be shocked if she had one more amazing record to offer the world. This has been the story of Emmylou Harris, a woman who fought against all odds to recognize her dream of succeeding in the music industry. If you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance you'll also enjoy the one showing on your screen right now. Click, enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you on the next one.